Hey, I'm Sarah, survivor, author, speaker, clarity coach, and I teach women how to get safe, stable, and strong. Welcome to my Jesus bubble. That's what I call my quiet, gentle morning times with God. And I'm really glad you're here to join me. If you like the story that we're reading today, or this resonates with you, I would love for you to just hit share, send this on to someone else, or tag a friend underneath. Now, right now, we are in the book Hinds' Feet on High Places. It's a sort of like a fantasy allegory, but it's the most spiritual and impacting fantasy you might have ever read by an author named Hannah Hernard, and I will drop the link underneath just in case you might like to grab one and read along with me in the mornings, because I do this every weekday morning until we're done with the book. I actually just got a message from someone yesterday that they had grabbed the book and they are reading along every single morning. And she said, you know what? This is making me cry. It is so good. It is so healing. And right now, our main protagonist, Much Afraid, that's her name, has just followed the shepherd, the chief shepherd, toward the foothills of the mountains. And the shepherd tells her, here we are at the river, and over on the other side, the foothills of the mountains begin. There we shall find your two guides waiting for you. It was strange and wonderful indeed, thought Much Afraid, that they had reached the river so quickly and were already approaching the mountains. Upheld by the shepherd's hand and supported by his strength, she had really forgotten her lameness and had been unconscious of tiredness and weakness. Oh, if only he would take her all the way to the high places instead of giving her over to the care of other guides. When she thought of this, she said to him imploringly, will you not take me all the way? When I'm with you, I am strong, and I am sure no one else but you can get me up to the high places. He looked at her most kindly, but answered quietly, much afraid, I could do what you wish. I could carry you all the way up to the high places myself instead of leaving you to climb there. But if I did, you would never be able to develop Hinds' feet and become my companion and go where I go. If you will climb to the heights this once with the companions I have chosen for you, even though it may seem a very long and in some places a very difficult journey, I promise you that you will develop Hinds' feet. Afterward, you will be able to go with me, leaping on the mountains, and be able to make the ascent and the descent in the twinkling of an eye. Moreover, if I carry you up to the high places now, with only a tiny seed of love in your heart, you will not be able to live in the kingdom of love. You will have to stay outside on places not so high. And these places are still within reach of your enemies. Look at this beautiful illustration. Isn't that a gorgeous watercolor? I love this version of the book. Some of them, he says, can visit the lower parts of the mountain. I have no doubt that you will meet them as you make the ascent. That is why I have chosen most carefully for you 2 of the very best and strongest guides. I assure you, however, that never for a moment shall I be beyond your reach or your call for help, even when you cannot see me. It is just as though I shall be present with you all the time, even though invisible. And you have my faithful promise that this journey, which you are now to make, will be the means of developing your Hinds' feet. You will give me a new name when I get to the top, quavered poor Much Afraid, who all of a sudden seemed to have become deaf to the music around her, and she seemed full of fears and forebodings again. Yes, certainly. When the flower of love is ready to bloom in your heart, you will be loved in return and receive a new name, replied the shepherd. Much Afraid paused on the bridge and looked back over the way they had come. The valley looked very green and peaceful, while the mountains to whose foot they had come towered above them like gigantic and threatening ramparts. Far away in the distance, she could see the trees growing around the village of Much Trembling, her village, And with a sudden pang, she pictured the shepherd's helpers going about their happy work, the flocks wandering over the pastures, and the peaceful little white cottage in which she had lived. As these scenes rose before her, tears began to prick in her eyes, and the thorn pricked in her heart. But almost at once she turned to the shepherd and said thankfully, "I will trust you and do whatever you want." Then, as she looked up in his face, he smiled most sweetly and said something he had never said before. "You have a real beauty, Much Afraid. You have such trustful eyes. Trust is one of the most beautiful things in the world. When I look at the trust in your eyes, I find you more beautiful than many a lovely queen." In a very short time, they were over the bridge and had come to the foot of the mountains, where the path began the ascent of the lower slopes. Here, great boulders were scattered all around, and suddenly Much Afraid saw the figures of two veiled women seated on one of the rocks at the side of the path. As the shepherd and she came up to that place, the two rose and bowed silently to him. "Here are the two guides which I promised," said the shepherd quietly. "From now on, until you are over the steep and difficult places, they will be your companions and helpers." Much Afraid looked at them fearfully. Certainly they were tall and appeared to be very strong, but why were they veiled? For what reason did they hide their faces? The longer and closer she looked at them, the more she began to dread them. They were so silent, so strong, so mysterious. Why did they not speak? Why give her no friendly word of greeting? "Who are they?" she whispered to the shepherd. "Will you tell me their names and why they don't speak to me? Are they dumb?" "No, they are not dumb," said the shepherd very quietly, "but they speak a new language, Much Afraid, a dialect of the mountains which you have not yet learned. But as you travel with them, little by little, you will learn to understand their words. They are good teachers. Indeed, I have few better. As for their names, I will let you tell them in your own language. Or I will tell you them, As for their names, I will tell you them in your own language, and later you will learn what they are called in their own tongue. This," said he, motioning toward the first of the silent figures, "is Sorrow, and the other is her twin sister, Suffering." Poor Much Afraid. Her cheeks blanched. She began to tremble from head to foot. She felt so like fainting that she clung to the shepherd for support. "I can't go with them," she gasped. I can't. "Oh, my lord shepherd, why do you do this to me? How can I travel in their company? It is more than I can bear. You tell me the way itself is so steep to the mountains and so difficult that I cannot climb it alone. Then why must you make Suffering and Sorrow my companions? Couldn't you have given me Joy and Peace to go with me, to strengthen me and encourage me and help me on the difficult way? I never thought you would do this to me." And she burst into tears. A strange look passed over the shepherd's face as he listened to this outburst. Then, looking at the veiled figures, he spoke and answered very gently, "Joy and Peace, are those the companions you would choose for yourself? You remember your promise to accept the helpers that I would give, because you believed that I would choose the very best possible guides for you. Will you still trust me, Much Afraid? Will you go with them? Or do you wish to turn back to the valley and to all your fearing relatives, to Craven Fear himself?" Much Afraid shuddered. The choice seemed terrible. Fear she knew only too well, but Sorrow and Suffering had always seemed to her the two most terrifying things which she could encounter. How could she go with them and abandon herself to their power and control? It was impossible. Then she looked at the shepherd, and suddenly she knew she could not doubt him, could not possibly turn back from following him, that if she were unfit and unable to love anything else and anyone else in the world, yet in her trembling, miserable little heart she did love him. Even if he asked the impossible, she could not refuse. She looked at him piteously and then said, "Do I wish to turn back? Oh, shepherd, to whom shall I go? In all the world I have no one but you. Help me to follow you, even though it seems impossible. Help me to trust you as much as I long to love you." As he heard these words, the shepherd suddenly lifted his head and laughed, a laugh full of exultation and triumph and delight. It echoed round the rocky walls in the little canyon in which they stood until for a moment or two it seemed as if the whole mountain range was laughing with him. The echoes bounded higher and higher, leaping from rock to rock and crag to crag, up to the highest summits, until it seemed as though the last faint echoes of it were running into heaven itself. When the last note, had faded into silence, his voice said very softly, "Thou art all fair, my love. There is no spot in thee." Then he added, "Fear not, much afraid. Only believe. I promise that you shall not be put to shame. Go with sorrow and suffering, and if you cannot welcome them now, when you come to the difficult places where you cannot manage alone, put your hands in theirs confidently, and they will take you exactly where I want you to go." Much Afraid stood quite still, looking up into his face, which now had such a happy look, the look of one who above all things delights in saving and delivering. In her heart, the words of a hymn written by another of the shepherd's followers began to run through her mind, and she started to sing softly and sweetly, "Let sorrow do its work, send grief or pain. Sweet are thy messengers, sweet their refrain, if they but work in me more love, O Christ, to thee. More love to thee, more love to thee." Others have gone this way before me, she thought, and they could even sing about it afterward. Excuse me, please. Will he, who is so strong and gentle, be less faithful and gracious to me, weak and cowardly though I am, when it is so obvious that the thing he delights in most of all is to deliver his followers from all their fears and to take them to the high places? With this came the thought that the sooner she went with these new guides, well, the sooner she would reach these glorious high places. She stepped forward, looking at the two veiled figures, and said with a courage which she had never felt before, "I will go with you. Please lead the way." For even then she could not bring herself to put out her hands to grasp theirs. The shepherd smiled again and then said clearly, "My peace I leave with you. My joy be fulfilled in you. Remember that I pledge myself to bring you to the high places at the top of these mountains, and that you shall not be put to shame. And now, till the day break and the shadows flee away, I will be like a roe or a young hart on the mountains." Then, before Much Afraid could realize what was happening, he had leaped onto a great rock at the side of the path, and from there to another, and yet another, swifter than almost her eyes could follow his movements. He was leaping upon the mountains, springing from height to height, going on before them, until in a moment or two he was lost to sight. When they could see him no longer, Much Afraid and her two new companions began to ascend the foothills. It could have been a curious sight, had there been anyone to watch, as Much Afraid started on her journey, limping toward the high places, shrinking as far as possible from the two veiled figures beside her, pretending not to see their proffered hands. But there was no one there to see, for if there is one thing more certain than another, it is that the development of Hinds' feet is a private process, demanding that there should be no onlookers. Tomorrow, we start Chapter 5, The Encounter with Pride. In case you missed it, this is the book Hinds' Feet on High Places, and it's the story of a young woman named Much Afraid, who very much loves the chief shepherd, and she asks him to plant the seed of love in her heart, and then to walk with her and carry her and guide her to the high places. So he does, with the help of two guides, Sorrow and Suffering. If you have been stumbling through your own sorrow and suffering, if you are trying to find clarity on what's next, how to get to the next place, what next steps to take, I would invite you to join my group coaching club. We meet once a month for live sessions, answering your burning questions and working together through the things that you need clarity on. I'll drop the link below. And also, I'll drop a link to the book in case you want to grab it and read along with me every morning. Monday through Friday, every morning, right around this time. I'm live right here. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.